hate to give up this soapbox even 1 week, but this is a good one, a good time to do it. I was just going to introduce him down here and turn it over to him and go join you in the audience, but we made this nice setup here, and so I'm going to sit here, but you step down, watch your step here if you want to, and
if I want to.
We don't want you hurt. He can't get started until, oh, by the way, I got to do a couple things. Next Tuesday, is Leah here? Next Tuesday is Life Quest Giving Day. It's big. They have set an incredibly ambitious goal, and that means between now and Tuesday, up until Tuesday, it's time to ante up, and for all these fine classes that you get. So keep that in mind. Second, the class after this is not going to meet, so if the governor is wound up and you're wound up, we're not hard and fast. The timekeeper has been instructed not to hassle us too much. He also has agreed, some of you said you got some old memorabilia you want him to sign. He's got a little time in the chapel over here to the right. He'll be in there later. So he's just being as agreeable as he can be. And I admire that. Okay. As he was as governor. Okay. He can't get to it until I introduce him. Let me just be very, very brief, which is not as brief as some would be. The resume. U.S. Attorney as a young man who, among other things, wore a bulletproof vest to personally negotiate with some covenant sword in the arm of the Lord, right-wing militia types. Member of Congress, one of the House impeachment managers involving another Arkansan. Then head of the Drug Enforcement Administration for George W. Bush. Then an original undersecretary in the beginning Homeland Security Department, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but undersecretary for Border Security and
Transportation.
Yeah. Then the NRA hired him to head a task force after Sandy Hook. Then he became governor of Arkansas for 8 years and steered us through the COVID crisis. Think of all the things he could talk about and be interesting that I hope he doesn't talk too much about today. Those experiences, drugs, border, guns, COVID, all of that. But the context for my inviting him is that we got into a discussion here after the Michigan primary. What about that sizable number of Republicans who didn't or still aren't voting for Donald Trump? They're voting for Nikki Haley. What about people who are true conservative Republicans? What are they going to do in this general election choice? And I was fumbling around, standing right there, trying to answer it, when I suddenly heard myself say, I wish we could get Asa Hutchinson down here to talk about that. And I texted him that afternoon, and he said, sure, April 10th would be his best date. So that's what he's here for. I hope he can talk about what he wants to. It's his show. But there's a thing happening, like he distinguished himself as a conservative Republican who had the courage, the nerve, to stand in front of hostile audiences, hostile MAGA audiences, and stand up for the rule of law and against the politics of grievance. He did that. So, he does, after that wonderful introduction, he didn't have to even address that if he doesn't want to. But you'll be disappointed, I'm sure. There are people, I heard Bill Maher ask the former defense secretary, and then I'll stop, the former defense secretary under Trump, who had told him the other night, he said, this man, I can't tell you the number of things Trump wanted to do that we stopped him from doing in a second term. I fear for this country. And then Maher said, so it's a binary choice. Are you going to vote for Joe Biden? And the former defense secretary, whose name you know that I don't, said, I'm not there yet. And Bill Maher said, when the you know what would you get there? So I'm not asking you that. I'm just catching the discussion. So enough of that. It's his show. He honors us by being here. I know you'll welcome him. The floor is now given to Governor Asa Hutchinson.
Thank you. Thanks, John, and thanks for the invitation today. I don't know if anybody controls that besides me, or maybe I'm just talking too loud. But it's great to be here, and John extended the invitation, and I said yes, and I assure you that I'm going to answer the question that he posed to me. It's probably not a dramatic answer, but it is an answer, and I will address that and defend my position. And I'm looking forward to the questions that you might have today. But first of all, let me tell you, this is an exciting time in my life. After 8 years as governor, and let me tell you, it was the highest honor of my political life to be governor of Arkansas. And thank you for the opportunity that I had. I started to say it was all fun, but then I remembered the COVID, and there were a few challenging times during there. I do remember one time as governor, though, I have grandchildren. Some of you might have grandchildren, and so my grandson was playing basketball up in Cabot. And so I said, I want to go up and see him. He played for Bentonville. He was 6'7". He played with Malik Monk. And so I was going up there. My security details said that Coach Calipari is there. And so I thought that was pretty cool. So I used my influence as governor to go sit with John Calipari as he was there to watch his new recruit, Marcus Monk. And so as a faithful granddad, I just poked him all the time, and I said, did you see my grandson out there playing? But I welcome him back to Arkansas. I hope the Board of Trustees handles that appropriately today. But I loved being governor of the state. And then after 8 years as governor and then 1 year as campaigning for President of the United States, it's a time of my life to catch up a little bit. And so we're looking at a lot of different things, having a great time. I live up in Rogers, and my wife Susan and I, we are doing a lot of things with the community, but also just catching up. But one of the things that I'm enjoying is speaking at different college campuses. And so I spoke at Washington Lee University, at Duke University, don't get mad at me, and just talked to the university yesterday at the Honors College, or 2 days ago, with the students and talking about just like what I'm talking about today. And if there's one thing I sense among the young people is that they just are disengaged from politics, from what they see between what the two major political parties are offering. And they're just saying, why bother? And that's not a good position for the politics, for our democracy to be in. And so I hope, I said all along that this is the most unpredictable political year in my lifetime. Now, with that great prediction that I made, John Brummett will be quick to point out that, well, it's become pretty predictable. The two parties are giving us two candidates that a majority of the voters say they would prefer not to have. And so it's becoming predictable in that sense, but it is still a lot of unpredictability that's ahead for us, particularly on the GOP side with significant criminal cases still pending against Donald Trump. He is unpredictable to begin with, and we'll see if the outcomes of those and there's any accountability and whether that changes the minds of voters. We will see. But most likely we're going to wind up in November with a challenge between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. So before I get to the question, though, I want to tell you a little bit about my experiences in running for President of the United States. First of all, it was a dream come true, a dream that didn't start till much later in life. I wasn't like Bill Clinton that knew he was going to run for president when he was in high school. I didn't even think about running for governor until I was 46 years old. and I got elected to Congress. And so it wasn't something that was necessarily on my radar scope, but whenever I saw what happened on January 6th and what led up to it, and clearly he was setting the stage for his denying the election results if he lost, and then he accelerated that after the election, and then it became into denying it, and I said, I will not support him for president again. And of course, and then there was January 6th, and then he refused to go to the inauguration. And someone here pointed out that I was at President Obama's inauguration with my son Seth, and I was there because as a member of the opposing party, we support our democracy with a peaceful transition of power. And when I saw that Donald Trump was not going to be there, first of all, hats off to Mike Pence for being there at the inauguration, and I was there as well, but I said, that is not what we need in American politics. That's not the leadership that we need in America. And then over the course of the next year, I was interviewed by national media, and I gave them that answer. And I said, there's going to be an alternative. There's going to be an alternative. Well, if you say that long enough, you become an alternative. And so Donald Trump accelerated his time for announcing, and then Nikki Haley moved it up, her announcement, and then I was the third announcement in April. And let me tell you, it was a highlight for me to be in Bentonville, my hometown, where I was born, where I practiced law on the square when it was a population of 9,000, and to announce for President of the United States on the courthouse square. And it's sort of a sad commentary on your campaign when you say one of the highlights was the announcement. But there was also really incredible experiences. And I want to brag on Iowa and New Hampshire. Now, they get a lot of criticism, and when you're minus 14 degrees on caucus day and you have only 100,000 people show up, there's room for criticism of the caucus process. But they're so engaged. And so I go into Iowa, and I go into a restaurant, and I'm sitting there with some of my advisors, and I'm having lunch, and pretty soon this gentleman comes over to me and says, you're running for president. We're two couples over here. Would you mind coming over? We have a few questions for you. And literally, I walk over there, and he puts a chair down, and they hit you with questions. And they see that as their responsibility. And so it's really an exciting part of democracy, and New Hampshire was the same way. I had the opportunity to speak in Exeter, New Hampshire, at the Exeter Town Hall. It's literally called the Town Hall. That's the name of the building. And I spoke on the stage, and it was the same stage that Abraham Lincoln spoke on in 1860 when he made his New Hampshire swing before the Republican convention in Chicago. And so those thrills of the campaign will stay with me a long time. But then you also had the debate. And you remember the challenge. I was asked the other day, how did you prepare for the debate? Well, I said, well, you got to remember, on Sunday, before the Wednesday debate, I was still trying to qualify. And thank you for helping me to get those 40,000 donors. Now, just to give you an illustration as to how difficult that is, and of course, the Democrats, going back in their debate criteria, you either had to have 1% in the polls or you had to have like 40,000 donors. But it was or. Well, the Republicans doubled down and said it's both. And I easily made the criteria for 1% in the polls, but I had to have 40,000 donors, and coming from a small state where I had 3,000 donors in this state, I had to go from 3,000 to 40,000 in a short amount of time. And the experts will tell you it cost about $30 of investment to generate one contribution of $1. And so, if you want $40,000, $30, that's $1.2 million. I didn't have $1.2 million. But we invested in it, and we tried every which way, and we were gaining, but it was clearly not quick enough. So I went on CNN, and I would go on the national media, and I would say, help get me on the debate stage, send $1 to asaforamerica.com. I would go out after I did that, 3-minute interview, and they would say, you just got 2,000 new supporters. And I say, well, let's try MSNBC. And so I go on MSNBC, and I say, if you want someone to tell the truth on Donald Trump in the debate, send $1 to Asa for America. We had 4,000 donors in 3 minutes. And so that's how you qualify for the debate. You got to utilize the media that helped a great deal in getting that message out. But being on the debate stage was an amazing experience for me, and I prepared. And, I knew that you had to distinguish yourself, and I said, I was prepared to talk about the 14th Amendment challenge that could come on Donald Trump, and I thought that would create some news. And, of course, one of the questions from Brett Baer was, how many of you would support the nominee of the party if they're a convicted felon? You remember that question. Well, it wasn't hard for me. I stood there just as firm as could be. I wasn't going to say yes to that question. And I looked out of the corner of my eye, and Chris Christie was next to me, and he was going sort of like this. And then on the other side, everybody immediately, raised their hand that they would support him even if he's a convicted felon. And then I saw Ron DeSantis, and he was just going every which way, looking at what everyone else was doing. But we did distinguish ourselves. And people ask me, well, what would you do different? And I would say, I could do 50 things different, corrections in the campaign to do things better. None of it would have made a difference. The outcome would have been absolutely the same. And so what I see this year is that it's not the year of a challenger, whether you're Nikki Haley or Mike Pence. 80% of the candidates dropped out even before the vote in Iowa. And in New Hampshire, as you know, it was really a one-on-one contest. And so it was not the year of a challenger, but it was a year of speaking conviction and truth for me. And I am satisfied with what I did and the message that I delivered, because I think it was important for our country to hear, and it was important for my party, the GOP, to understand. Now, so that's a little bit of that history. We are in a divided position in our country. But we've had times of division in our country before. I look back in 1860, and I got this new book on the Convention of 1860 in Chicago at the Wigwam, a building they built just for the Republican Convention. 1860, you can imagine how rough a city it was. But they had thousands and thousands of delegates there, and the issue was the potential of the South breaking away, the issue of slavery. And Abraham Lincoln was the dark horse. William Seward was the one who everyone expected to get the Republican nomination then. And so it was a time of division in 1860. You fast forward through Reconstruction, a time of division in our country, the terrible challenge of the Depression in the 30s that my parents were married in. And you go into the pre-World War II, and you had the time of division in our country. Remember the America First movement that was led by Joseph Kennedy and Charles Lindbergh, that said we should not be supporting as a country England in their opposition to and the potential invasion of Germany into England. And they said, America first. We should not be supporting them, because even if we sent them all of our armament, they're still going to lose. That was their America First argument in 1940 that sort of reminds us of some of the arguments that you hear today. That was a time of division. You fast forward to my generation and the civil rights movement in 1968, another convention in Chicago in which Eugene McCarthy was the favored candidate because he was the anti-war candidate at the time and caused Lyndon Johnson to drop out of New Hampshire. But for some reason of the power brokers, Hubert Humphrey inherited the delegates of Lyndon Johnson, and Hubert Humphrey didn't even campaign among the states in the primaries, but he goes in there as the lead in the convention, and that's why you had the riots outside, because they saw the convention being taken away by the power brokers, which led to reform. It was a time of division in our country. The Vietnam War, Richard Nixon. And today we're in a time of division that is magnified for four different reasons. It's magnified, our time of division, because of social media, in which people are anonymous. They can say what they want to say and even say things they would not say publicly, but they would say it on social media, and that further divides us. Secondly, it is because of the mass media today. You know, in previous times of division, you had the mass media, the national media, that gave us the news, but it was not broken down to a Republican message or a Democrat message or a Trump message or a Biden message. And today you have it fragmented, that adds to our division in this country. And then thirdly, the division is magnified because we have a president, Joe Biden, who cannot unite this country even during times of war and conflict. And through history, if we come together as a country, generally it is because of threats. Well, we have threats today, but we're not unified, and I think that falls on President Biden and his failure to make the case as to what we are doing in Israel, what we are doing in supporting Ukraine, to effectively communicate and bring America together during this time of threat. And the fourth reason, of course, is Donald Trump. That Donald Trump magnifies, makes money on the division, and further divides America in every way that he can. And so that's why we're in a unique time today. And so now let me come to the question. So I'm not going to support President Biden, and I'll be gentle, but that's why I ran for president. One of the reasons is because I believe he's weak on energy security. He's has not done an effective job in terms of controlling federal spending. He's weak on border security, and he has been dismal in terms of national security in building the support of the American public behind his policy. And so I don't believe that's the right direction for America. We talk about threats to our democracy today, and if I see anything, we are a resilient democracy and we will survive whoever is president. But I see both from Donald Trump and from Joe Biden threats in different ways to our democracy. So I'm not going to support Joe Biden, and I'm still a Republican. But I'm not going to support Donald Trump for the reasons that I have articulated. I do believe he should not be misleading America in terms of the January 6th insurrectionists being patriots. We need to have people that will counterbalance what he's saying, and I want to be a counterbalance. And to speak the truth to the Republican Party. And so I'm not going to support him, so where do you go? Well, I'm in the same boat of many Americans. You just think about those that ran for president. Chris Christie has not endorsed Donald Trump, the presumptive nominee of the party. Mike Pence has not. Nikki Haley has not, even though I would predict that she will at some point in the future. And I have not. And then that's just those who are running for president. You look at the Nikki Haley supporters, those that were there the longest to say we need to have an alternative, the consistent 25-30% of the GOP base. Where do they go? And I think what you'll see is that they will say none of the above. and they will either they will express this by either staying home on election day, or bypassing the presidential race, going to the other races, or by writing in a name, or by a third party. Now, I was hoping for a good a third party candidate in the no labels effort. They raised $70 million to get on the ballots, and they foreclosed it and said, we don't see a meaningful or a possible path to victory. And I can understand that, but it's still a disappointment. And so you will see me, along with millions of others, saying we need to teach the major two parties a lesson that you cannot give us candidates that do not reflect America and the direction that we want to go, or not giving us the alternatives that we want. Now, I want to give you just a reference point, though, because I believe that we should have loyalty to country over party. I believe that you have to make an independent judgment on candidates, and I don't believe in party loyalty oaths. That's one of the reasons I ran as a Republican. Some of you will remember that the Democrat Party in Arkansas used to have a Democrat Party loyalty oath. Well, I didn't like it then. I don't like it for either party. And so I was chairman of the Republican Party of Arkansas in the 1990s, helping to build our Republican Party that later became a majority party in this state. But then in the 1990s, we were struggling. We were trying to recruit candidates, we were trying to win elections, and we were making some progress, particularly in the legislative area. But in 1994, I was chairman of the party. What is the chairman of the party supposed to do? Support the nominee of the party, right? Well, that's Ronna McDaniel's view on it for sure. And it is true, you should. But we had two candidates that year. One of them was Darrell Glasscock, and the other was a lawyer up from Northwest Arkansas. What's his name, John? What year? Well, I've got to get it here. Okay. It was 1994, and Dan Ivey was the candidate. So we had two nominees that were outliers. They were not good candidates. And as chairman of the party, I said we should not be supporting them, even though they were nominee of the party. And so it's consistent what I'm doing today with what I've done in the past. And I value the role I can play in shaping the future of the GOP, and hopefully my voice will count. Before I turn it open for questions, how am I doing?
You're doing fine.
All right, she says I'm doing fine. I want to make a couple other points. You know, I follow the mentorship of Ronald Reagan. He appointed me as the youngest United States attorney in the nation. And there are three characteristics that I believe are important today in American politics that he emulated. One, he was a consistent conservative. And so he lost in 1976 to Gerald Ford at the convention, and I thought that was the last chance he'd ever have to be president. 4 years later, the nation turned to Ronald Reagan and elected him president. He didn't change his position. He was a consistent conservative. And then, after he got elected, you had Tip O'Neill, and the Democrats were in charge of Congress. And he said, how am I going to get my economic package through? And he said, I've got to work with the Democrats. And he was pragmatic in his leadership. He was a consistent conservative. He was pragmatic in his leadership. But then the third thing was, he was an optimist about the future of our country. He always saw America on the rise, America as the shining example of freedom across the globe. And I, after campaigning in New Hampshire and South Carolina and all across this country, I still have that same optimism about our future. We're resilient, we're going to survive, and we're going to do well, however this election comes out. But we still need to fight hard. I'm a Republican, and that means I want the Republican Party to reflect the principles of Ronald Reagan, of Abraham Lincoln, of equal opportunity, of self-initiative, of accountability, of controlling federal spending, and the strength of America and leadership abroad. That, to me, reflects the principles of Ronald Reagan, of our party. And that's what I want to fight for. And so this year, we've got a leader, Donald Trump, that has redefined the Republican Party in his image. How does that change? That changes through voices that say the parties are not giving us what we want. And I believe in the two-party system, so I'm not going to be supporting a third party. I want the two parties to make adjustments and corrections because they've served America well, and always before the major parties do change whenever they see threats and failures. So I'm confident the Republican Party can change, but it's going to be a difficult year before, and a question of time before we can change. You know, there's some reforms that I think are important whenever you look at the presidential election system. And I'll just put out a couple of them here. One is that you ought to do away with the public funding aspect of presidential campaigns. Nobody utilizes it. And I noted that in 2016, a couple candidates applied for the matching funds, and the FEC were split in their votes. They couldn't even make a decision on it. So it didn't work. Since then, hardly anybody's even applied for it. And, you know, I ask our accountants and lawyers, and they say, we don't even know how to do it. Anyway, it needs to be ended. Secondly, we need to reform our campaign finance laws. Super PACs have taken over, where you have the funding that goes in unlimited fashions to super PACs that overshadow the candidates and their fundraising ability. And of course, you're supposed to have a line of demarcation where you can't coordinate between the two. Well, that line, Ron DeSantis sort of clouded it over in Iowa, where the super PAC really did all of the funding of his campaign. That needs to be reformed. Thirdly, I think we ought to go to a system of regional primaries. I like Iowa and New Hampshire. They can be first, but then after that, you need to break it up into regional primaries, and the parties ought to be able to designate that. So you can have, there's nothing better than going to a small state like New Hampshire or Iowa and making your case. It's just like running for governor of Arkansas. You're just in New Hampshire, particularly a smaller state. And they pay attention to it. So, and you probably can't change that anyway. So leave that alone, but then break it up into regional primaries after that. And then the parties need to move away from caucuses. Iowa caucus is there. They do it well. But you saw this year with a Trump-dominated Republican Party, the states like Nevada moving to a caucus, Colorado moving to a caucus, and that made it very difficult for candidates to compete, particularly the challengers. So those are some reforms that I think might make some sense. And so, John, did I answer the question?
Is my microphone on? Is it now? Is it now? Now it is. Let me squeeze in one question. I think it's fair, and I'll couch it in a compliment. One of the things I admired about you over the years as governor is that you are unfailingly pragmatic. You faced the realities and made pragmatic choices. I would say that distinguished you among anything else. Pragmatically, one of these guys you don't like, and I don't like, and many don't like, is going to be president. One of them is. And don't you have a citizen's responsibility, a political leader's responsibility, a pragmatic obligation to make a choice and declare it? Well, sorry, I just thought it was an appropriate question.
John, your questions are always appropriate. Some of them just aren't worth answering. But that one is. And that's a fair commentary, and there will be many people that will make that judgment. Mark Esper is the former Secretary of Defense that you're speaking of. And, you know, he says he's not there yet. Well, he might get there, and he might support, you know, the alternative to Donald Trump. And so we'll see how it develops. You know, perhaps it's because of statements that I've made, though, and I've said I'm not going to support Joe Biden, I'm not going to support Donald Trump, so it sort of leaves me there. We can always change depending upon the circumstances, but I also, I want to, there's just so much unpredictable. How many of you believe Donald Trump's going to be convicted of a criminal case between now and November? All right, so how many of you believe it will make any difference if he's convicted of a criminal case? That's, you know, a smattering, and the polls show that, you know, about a third of the Republicans would lose support for Donald Trump if he was convicted of a felony. Now, we'll see if that remains true. The challenge for the Republicans is that the delegates to the convention are so tied into Donald Trump that I don't know that that will change at the convention. But you know, if there is a conviction, we don't know whether there will be or not, but that could have an impact on the race. So there's a lot of things that could impact the race between now and November. So I think it's fair to keep those options open. It may come down to that binary choice that you mentioned. I may reevaluate. Donald Trump might have salvation between now and then that will come, but might become a, you know, a true public servant. And so, you know, life could change between now and then, but that's how I see it now. All right, let's turn it open to questions that you might have. Yes, sir. All right, the question is, what's my opinion of ranked choice voting? And I've had absolutely no enthusiasm for ranked choice voting, but I'm warming to it. I thought in Alaska it worked fairly well in the Senate race there, and so it's going to have to be developed by citizen initiatives. If you're the majority party, you will never support ranked choice because you lose some of that power and some of the ability to, it puts your majority more at risk. The argument for it, of course, is that it's going to somehow bring our parties more to the middle, our candidates, our elected officials, more to reflect America, and versus the extremes. So what I see so far is that it's worked well, so I'm warming to it, but not 100% there yet. Yes, ma'am.
As you know, Arkansas has the lowest voter turnout in the country. How are we going to improve that? How can we get Arkansans to vote?
The question is, you know, how can we improve our voter turnout in Arkansas? And, you know, the burden is on each individual to understand the responsibility for us to educate our children and our grandchildren. It's been a joy of mine to take my sons and daughters into the voting booth to vote with them when they turn 18. Actually, we separate, but we vote. We vote, and we teach them to vote, and then, you know, our grandson, you know, they understand the obligation. So it's an individual responsibility, but then secondly, it's on the candidates. The candidates have to turn on voters and not turn off voters. They have to, and it's hard particularly with young people. You have to inspire them and say, it does make a difference, and your vote does count. So it's a combination of those two. I think the third part of it is, you know, you're going to have, in New Hampshire, you have a 90% voter turnout. But you do because their vote counts 10 times more than everybody else's vote. I mean, they're determining the next president, and so they're motivated. They sense the responsibility as part of their tradition. And so if you break our primary process up into regions where you have a chance for the candidates actually to come in. This year, we didn't have any presidential campaign come to Arkansas at all. And so that does not enhance the voter turnout. So I think all of those, individual responsibility, the candidate's responsibility, and let's get some regional primaries to make Arkansas more relevant. Yes, sir.
Governor, isn't your response to John's question a recommendation not to?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Repeat the question.
The question was, you know, my response to John basically saying none of the above is encouragement not to vote. And no, that is absolutely not the case, because everybody will express it in different ways. Some will go in and vote for third parties, but you've also got every other race on the ballot that matters, and so yes, you go vote. And the president, someone's going to vote for a third party. Some will vote for, you know, and you look at Michigan and Wisconsin that voted, they had an organized effort, none of the above. It was an organized effort to send a message. And so what is voting about? It is about communicating your views and the public's views on the direction of our country. Well, you're expressing yourselves, you're just expressing yourself in a different way. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, thank you so much for being here. So respect your willingness to publicly state you won't support a convicted felon on the stage. So kudos to you. That's a man of integrity. Question for you is, how and will the Republican Party be able to ever recover, if you will, from the effects of Donald Trump?
The question is, how in the world can we recover? How can the Republican Party recover from the impact of Donald Trump? Well, Donald Trump has to go off the scene. And Donald Trump will go off the scene either by losing in November, or if he's elected. And let me tell you, he's shown a lot of strength and resilience out there. And so he could be elected in November, and then you're looking at 4 years of turmoil and 4 years that he will dominate the Republican Party. And so if he's elected, the turnaround for the Republican Party is longer term. If he is defeated and we lose, to me, you know, here again you have the comparisons to Ronald Reagan in 1976 was trying to reshape the Republican Party into a more conservative direction. He fought that battle. It was divisive. He lost. But 4 years later, it reformed the party. And so sometimes losing is required to reshape the party. And obviously Donald Trump has his claws on the party now. That's not going to change until he is off the scene in some fashion. And the question is, of course, there's those that mimic Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others that are trying to say, I can do just like Donald Trump. And so it's up to the voters to say, no, that doesn't work. There was back in the back. Yes, sir. Well, great question. And the question is there any chance for changing our system so that the popular vote controls who's elected president? Now, I changed your question a little bit there. Is that okay? And the answer is I sure hope not. I believe in the Electoral College. And all right, the answer is, first of all, if you did away with the Electoral College and it was just a popular vote, where are the candidates going to spend their time? California, New York, East and West Coast. And you'll never see them. It will be truly flyover time. And Arkansas will be totally irrelevant, as well Oklahoma, as well as Louisiana, as well as Iowa, as well as New Hampshire. And so it gives a voice to a broader section of America. And so you know, there could be some reforms of the Electoral College. In Nebraska, they're the only state that does it, but they determine their electoral distribution or allocation by congressional district. And so that is would be a greater reflection of the popular will. And so, and that's, what was it, in the Omaha area, I think is where Obama was able to campaign. I think he got that electoral vote, or maybe it was Biden that did, but it was because they broke it up in that way. So the answer is, I don't like the popular vote dictating it. I like the Electoral College. There might be some changes that would be helpful. Great question. Yes, ma'am. Well, I mean, obviously, I respect that, and you can make that case.
Governor,
Oh, I'm sorry. The case is Donald Trump is so terrible that Joe Biden makes some sense, and she was just making the case for Joe Biden as being a rational choice and not being the threats that Donald Trump. And my response to that is, you can identify a lot of threats that will come to our democracy from my perspective as a conservative, that would come from 4 more years of Joe Biden. If you look at border security, he has, I mean, I was in charge of that in the Bush administration. We didn't get it perfect by any means, but it is a disaster today, and that's been a failure of leadership. Whenever you look at the energy policy, you know, I think the regulatory threat that is coming out is a danger. So I can make that case. I can make the case that about Donald Trump as well. I mean, obviously, I ran against both of those. So I respect that. There are going to be a lot of people that reach that decision. Those are decisions that everybody has to make this year.
Governor,
Yes.
Leah, did you have something?
Interrupt just for a second, just to announce that we do have 10 o'clock classes, and so if this is a good time to take a tiny break and go to your 10 o'clock class if you'd like, the Arkansas and the environment class will be meeting in room 62. So 10 o'clock classes are still happening. One has moved. If you'd like to continue to stay in here, I think the governor has a few more minutes, and he'll let us know. You might say last question when you're ready to break.
Well, they're great questions, and so we're going to go
So
to
feel
this.
free to move to your next class at the appropriate time.
That way, I'm glad you told me that, because I know then they won't be walking out on me. Yes, sir. All right, just a second. I got to get back here. Yeah. All right, the question is about gerrymandering, and instead of legislators doing our drawing the districts to let a bipartisan panel do it. You know, from what I've observed from other states, you know, in some instances the bipartisan panel might work, but in one state they got one, how in the world do you find people that you can really, well, actually, the panels are, some of the initiative acts are trying to go into independence where they're not reflecting any party. So you can do bipartisan or you can do independent, but the citizens panel can work. I've seen it also log jam, just like legislatures can log jam and not get it done. So I don't know that there's a perfect system. The key to me is that you have a system that can move and make a decision, and that then it can be challenged, and because they're always challenged. But I hate to see the districts being drawn and being in question during the election or even after the election. And so get something that's definitive. So I support the legislative doing it. I think it's a good balance. The check and balance is the governor can veto it. And then in Arkansas, of course, you have the Board of Apportionment that does the congressional districts. Yes, sir. Well, I mean, your point, the point is, with the national media coverage, why do you worry about them coming to your state? Well, first of all, it's still very, very meaningful when they come to the state. There's something wonderful in America about being able to touch a president or be in the same room or at the same rally. So yeah, I think it makes a big difference. But secondly, if you're paying attention only to the voters, you're trying to get the voters in the most populous regions of the country, which would be the East and West Coast, you're going to adjust your policies to get those votes. So it's not just a matter of physical presence, but it's also a matter of what policies you're articulating. And there would be different policies for East, West Coast versus Middle America. All right, yes, sir.
With the new leadership at RNC, will there be money for down ballot candidates?
The question is, with the new leadership of the RNC, will there be money for down ballot candidates? They're clearly struggling financially. They had a big fundraiser there that was going to the party as well as to Donald Trump. So I think the Republicans will wind up being competitive. They will be able to send money to the local candidates as well. The biggest objection is that whenever they're doing a big fundraiser for the party, the first money goes to Donald Trump's campaign and Donald Trump's political action committee that pays his legal bills. Then the rest of it goes to the party. And so that's the concern, that the party machinery is being used to raise money to pay Donald Trump's legal bills, and obviously that shortens the amount of money they have for other candidates. All right, let's do 2 questions here, and then we got one in the back. Yes, sir. It should have been taken up. The question is on the bipartisan border bill, and the answer is it should have been taken up by the House. I have a lot of confidence in Senator Lankford from Oklahoma that negotiated that, and the key was you had asylum reform in there that Republicans, that conservatives wanted, that was needed, and President Biden said no, and then he caved and he said yes, and that was in the bipartisan bill. Why can we not accept yes for something we wanted? So yes, there should have been a vote on it. Not a perfect bill, but it was a good bill. Last question back in the back. Asa Hutchinson. It is about leadership, and it's hard in Washington. It is very difficult. I've been there, and the spirit of the team has got to win. But I've been actually impressed with Mike Johnson. He's willing to pass bills with Democrat support. You know, if the majority of his conference supports it, that's good enough. Let's get it on the floor, and don't let it be controlled by a small minority. But absolutely, America can do better. Can do better in terms of unifying. And and Joe Biden, it's almost a failure to communicate. He is just not communicating effectively as to why, to be able to rally support behind the initiatives of supporting Ukraine and supporting Israel. What's long-term strategy for the United States investments? And then Donald Trump is intentionally divisive. So a little bit difference there, but absolutely, America can do better, and we're a resilient country, and our democracy is strong. So I'm encouraged by not just the young people that I spoke to at Fayetteville campus the other day, but I'm encouraged by you because you're so engaged, you're concerned, you want our country to be successful. We might come to different conclusions, but let's cheer each other on in that process. Thank you all for letting me be with you. Thank you, John.
We're done. Thanks.
Good crowd.